Hardwired to Self-Destruct by Metallica. But you always talk about Metallica. Why do you have to talk about Metallica all the time? It's like the only thing you talk about on this channel. Yeah, I know. I talked about them a lot, blah, 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 but this came out almost exactly a year ago as of recording this, and I haven't reviewed it at all. So I feel like it's sort of a duty almost to go and talk about this album a little bit. Kind of almost obligation, I guess you could say. What was that inflection? Anyway, so Hardwired to Self-Destruct is a double album, 2 discs. Well, I mean, if you get a special, a limited edition, which is really, well, anyway, it has 3 discs, but really the album proper has 2 discs, each disc with 6 tracks on it. And it's a Metallica album, an album that followed up Death Magnetic. It's 8 years in the making. It was 8 years in the making, I should say. So how well does it follow up Death Magnetic? Well, that's an interesting question in and of itself, because a lot of people, I remember when this album was first released, my brother and I went into the local record store, and we went in and we got this Metallica album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. We picked it up and we left and we listened to it, all that fun stuff. And but while we were there, everybody who was talking about it and like, oh man, it's the best album that they've made in such a long time. It's like Master Puppets, it's like this, I've been binge listening to it, for the past 2 days. It's the only thing that's been blaring on my sound system and my radio, and it's on XM radio, just on loop or whatever. And, it sort of, there was a lot of excitement surrounding the album because, it had been almost a decade since Metallica had released a full-length album. Yeah, we did get, stuff like Beyond Magnetic and that one song, Lords of Summer, which actually didn't make it onto this album, but I'll bring that back up later on. It was just one of those things that there was a lot of excitement around, and a lot of people were saying how great it was and how it was a proper return to form for Metallica, as if Death Magnetic had never happened, which is, I know, sounds weird, because if you were to have rewound back to when Death Magnetic came out, people were saying that about Death Magnetic. And, of course, not everyone. But some people, a lot of people were. They said that was the master puppets of this, of this sort of, it was the next Master Puppets, or, it fit between the Black Album and the End and Justice for All. And that's, again, pretty interesting idea that they had there. But as far as Hardwired to Self-Destruct is concerned, I know, because I'm an avid viewer, I guess you could say, listener. Well, not avid, but I follow him quite a bit. The Needle Drop, Anthony Fantano. I listen to his reviews and his thoughts on music, actually, mostly. His, editorial stuff, because I'm really into that. Not much into, the pop, hip-hop stuff that he does, but that's just my thing. But anyway, he did talk about, this album when it was more relevant than it is now. And he did, say, he did use the word bloated to describe this. And I have to say, I don't necessarily completely agree that it's bloated per se, but I know what he's getting at. And I totally understand why he used the word bloated. Mainly because, it's a double album. It's actually a shorter Metallica album, only about 57 minutes long. Or no, sorry, no. Never mind. Not 50. Wrong math. No, sorry. It's a longer album. It's 77 minutes long. So, it's almost as long as Load and about as long as Reload. So, right there is sort of an issue, at least lengthwise. Good albums don't have to be long. In fact, one of the things that I noticed through reviewing music, just listening to albums and music in general, is typically some of the greatest albums ever made fit between the time frames of like 35 minutes to like 50. Between that's like the sweet spot for a lot of albums. At least a lot of the great ones that I've listened to fall between those lengths. Now, I'm not saying that album length is a deciding factor for me whether or not I believe an album is good or bad or whatever. But usually, when an album starts to get long, it kind of makes me worried that there's a bigger chance that there's filler material on there. And so when it comes to Hardwired to Self-Destruct, there is quite a bit of filler material in my opinion. What I mean by that, I'll elaborate. So the first disc, let's tackle the first disc. People were really excited when the track Hardwired was dropped. Everybody was going crazy over it. They were saying that it was one of the best songs that Metallica had made in years and whatever, but I was kind of lukewarm or neutral on the song. I didn't think it was necessarily great Metallica song. I thought it was kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It was a little bit underwhelming. And I know that a lot of people will be like, "What? But it's fast. It's insane. Metallica's good again." Like, I understand, but at the same time, I think a lot of people who were praising this song were maybe a little too easy to impress when it comes to judging the quality of this song, because they hadn't even really, it's like you hadn't fed an animal for a really long time, but then you give them something like, I don't know, you give them a thing of celery, and it's like the greatest thing ever because like they hadn't eaten in days or something like that. And like celery is gross, but because it's the first thing they've been able to eat in days, then of course it's going to be the best food their favorite food ever, the best thing they've eaten in days, as it were. So that's kind of how I feel about Hardwired. It's meant to build hype, and I understand, and it is mercifully short. That I will say. And that is something that should be noted. But then when you get to the rest of the songs off of disc 1, they get gradually better. It's really interesting. It's like a hierarchy almost, at least for me. Because you have Hardwired, which is sort of like the low point. And then Atlas Rise is a little bit better. Then Now That We're Dead is a little bit better. Then Moth in a Flame is a little bit better. Then Dream No More is considerably better. And then Halo on Fire is the pinnacle, which is pretty interesting. Now, that said, a lot of the songwriting on disc 1, a lot of what makes the songs off of disc 1 really good, or, makes them good other than Hardwired, is the chorus. For some reason, the choruses on, tracks 2 to 6 are really well written. They build up to the choruses extraordinarily well as well. And when those choruses hit, they hit very, very well. there's a lot of really good vocal performances by James Hetfield on here. In fact, I would say that that's probably the best part of this album, because there's not a lot in the way of riffing in terms of at least what you would expect from a thrash metal album, let's say. There's not as much riffing on here as even off of Death Magnetic, in my opinion. A lot of the riffs that we do get are, a lot slower in pace. In fact, one of the things that you notice in this album is that outside of Hardwired and Spit Out the Bone, most of these songs are just sort of mid-tempo, sort of metal tunes, which is fine. It doesn't, just because they aren't fast doesn't mean they aren't good. I know a lot of people have this sort of idea that if it isn't fast, it isn't good. But no, it just, that's not, doesn't mean that it's bad because they're mid-tempo. But, it starts to turn into a slog after a while. After disc 1, you get into disc 2. And disc 2 is where I believe all the filler is, for the most part. A lot of it. Even looking at the song lengths, right? On disc 1, they stay pretty much sub 7 minutes on average for the most part. Maybe 6 minutes, except for, Halo on Fire. But as an average, let's say about, 6 minutes and 40 seconds, right? On disc 2, a lot of these songs are much happier to hit times much closer to 7 minutes, minus Murder 1. And that's where the problems really begin to show themselves, because a lot of these songs, they don't have that oomph anymore. The choruses on these songs, on disc 2, I'm talking about Confusion, Man Unkind, Here Comes Revenge, Am I Savage, Murder 1. These songs generally, their strengths are in fleeting moments musically. And they really feel like they could be developed more, and probably if they were shortened, they would be much better than how they are right now. I don't know if it's Metallica's feeling to, like, if they feel like they need to put out songs that are over 5 minutes long, but honestly, if they were to just cut down those songs, they would be so much more tolerable, and probably would help their quality. And that's not to say they're bad songs necessarily, but they overstay their welcome a lot of the time. The only exception on there is Spit Out the Bone, which is the closest thing to thrash metal that you're going to get on this, in my opinion, outside of Hardwired, but probably more so than Hardwired, to be honest, because Hardwired just feels like fan service in a way. And it's weird. I feel like this album would be a lot better off if some of these songs were just taken out, entirely. And one of the biggest mistakes I think they made when it came to making this album was they did not include Lords of Summer on the track list. I know disc 3, if you get the limited edition, it does come with Lords of Summer on the 3rd disc, but that's not the album proper. Honestly, if they had gotten rid of Confusion and put Lords of Summer in its place, at least they would have bookended disc 2 with 2 good songs. In fact, Lords of Summer would probably be the best track on the album. Honestly, I mean, it's the closest. Lords of Summer is really the closest thing to Master of Puppets-esque song that you can possibly get on this album. But of course it's not on there, so you're kind of at a loss at that point. But, in my opinion, a lot of people, even Anthony Fantano, he says that it is a step up from Death Magnetic, and I actually don't see that. Musically, I believe Death Magnetic had more focus. I feel like even though the songs were usually around 7 minutes long, they didn't overstay their welcome nearly as much as the latter half of this album's songs did. And they felt like they had more substance. There was more happening in the guitar. The production quality on Death Magnetic is not great. But, in fact, it's awful. But, musically speaking, I have to say that this doesn't necessarily top Death Magnetic. The only thing that it does top Death Magnetic at is the vocals. The vocals here should be the center of attention if you listen to this, especially the first half. In fact, I would listen to the first half of this album, Spit Out the Bone, and that's the album. Maybe, and Lords of Summer. Okay, so disc 1, all the tracks there, Spit Out the Bone, Lords of Summer, that's the album. I think that would be a better an 8 track long album that's a little like around 50 minutes long. That's a little over 50 minutes long. I think that would have been a really good follow-up to Death Magnetic. But as it stands right now, it's serviceable. The first half of this album is good. It carries its own weight. Unfortunately, it doesn't make up for sort of the rest of the album. That in their own right, those songs do have their own, they have their moments. But those moments don't make up for the 6-7 minute slogs that you have to sit through in order to hear them. And they are fleeting. So, in my opinion, I don't think it's better than Death Magnetic. And maybe that's a nostalgia thing. I don't know. But it just doesn't... I can't find a song that's on here that's better than, let's say, All Nightmare Long. Oh, and I guess I should talk about guitar solos too. They're there. I sort of, I used to be really into Kirk Hammett's guitar solos, but then I just lost. It just doesn't do it for me anymore, and the guitar solos are there. They take up. They're nowhere near as long from what I remember. Them being on Death Magnetic, but it's Kirk Hammett. You know what you're gonna get. He hasn't really changed that much. To be fair, we haven't really gotten a guitar solo out of Kirk Hammett that's really, really memorable since the Black Album. So it's kind of to be expected at this point. So, that's the album isn't bad though. It isn't if you're a Metallica fan, you're gonna like it. There's going to be stuff on here that you like. Is it Master of Puppets now? Is it today's Master of Puppets? Absolutely not. Death Magnetic isn't today's Master of Puppets. The thing with this album in particular is that, a lot of people kind of complained that Death Magnetic still took elements of songwriting elements from Load and Reload. This album does that even more so. So, it's farther away from the Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning or whichever, or Kill 'Em All. Load is closer to Kill 'Em All, but, whatever. Honestly, though, melodically speaking, this album is a lot more. It is a lot less taking away from the 80s material. It takes more from. It takes cues from there, but it also kind of mixes them with Load and Reload, and it has a larger dose of Load and Reload than Death Magnetic had. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it's something to be pointed out. And that's why I don't feel that it is the next Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning or, Kill 'Em All or Injustice for All. Like, I mean, people change their favorite Metallica albums every day to be cool or whatever. But anyway, that's a different story. That's my take on this album. Let me know what you think, and yeah, that's that.